And you are good to go.
Good to go? Okay, great. Greetings, everyone. Before we get started, I would like to read the land acknowledgement statement. The Southern Illinois University system respectfully acknowledges the indigenous peoples and lands on which our colleges reside. We are honored and grateful to gather here today on Native land. We are committed in word and deed to enhancing relationships, equity, and the rights of indigenous communities. We are resolved to strengthen their sovereignty and self-determination, to protect and preserve their language, culture, spiritual traditions, and relationships with land and people. So officially, good afternoon, SIU faculty, staff, students, and community members. I am Dr. Sheila Caldwell, SIU System Vice President of Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as Chief Diversity Officer. Welcome to our monthly Conversations of Understanding. Today's topic is the SIU System Today, leading efforts to advance an anti-racist and inclusive campus community. I am so pleased that we have a formidable panel joining us today. To get started, we have SIU System President Dr. Dan Mahoney, who joined us in March 2020 at the height of the pandemic. We have Dr. Jerry Cruz, SIU School of Medicine Dean and Provost. We also have joining us today Chancellor Dr. Austin Lane, who oversees our SIU Carbondale campus. And last but definitely not least, we want to welcome Dr. James T. Minor, who recently joined us on March 1st of this year. And we are so pleased to have you be a part of this panel today as Edwardsville's 10th Chancellor and SIU first African-American Chancellor for the system. So welcome all of you. Today, panelists will discuss concrete actions and steps taken over the past 2 years that have advanced the SIU mission, as well as anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. For those of you who are joining us today as participants, you are encouraged to envision where we as a university system want to be in the coming years. And to that end, we would invite you to actually put questions in the chat today. We have Mr. Todd Bryson, who will be facilitating and moderating the Q&A session. So for those of you who may not be aware, our format today, our panelists will be responding to prepared questions that they have received from Diversity Advisory Council members and others. And then the final 30 minutes of our session will be dedicated to each of you. So you will have the opportunity to ask follow-up questions or new questions that we have not discussed during our panel today. So again, please take the opportunity to be active participants because we definitely want to hear from you. So to get started, I would actually like to direct our first question to Dr. Cruz. And before you begin, Dr. Cruz, I just wanted to say I was so pleased to read the article in today's State Journal Register, Treating Everyone Equitably Takes Effort and Empathy. And you embody that so well. So I'm glad to start with you. Can you please share a few concrete action steps that you have taken as the leader for the SIU School of Medicine to advance anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I think it's also worth noting that Dr. Jerry Cruz has led this effort as being the first to announce the School of Medicine as an anti-racism institution in 2019. And then Dr. Mahoney has also announced in 2021 that the system as a whole will advance anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I want to start with you first because I know that you have really been dedicated and focused on this effort for a while now. So please share concrete action steps that we can all learn from today.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Caldwell. It's great to be here and to tell a little bit of the story right now. I think I'll start with a couple of historical issues because they relate to the actions that have been taken. One of the foundational principles for the School of Medicine when it was founded in 1970 was social accountability. And one of the programs that we started early on, 1974, was our MedPrep program, medical and dental educational preparatory program, post-baccalaureate program for students who didn't quite have the credentials to get into medical or dental school, but we knew in interviews that they would be good students for us. Most of them were from underrepresented groups. Over 1,500 have graduated from that program. More than 80% have gotten into medical or dental school, and they've performed just great. And it's given the School of Medicine a great diversity from the very beginning. doesn't say anything about inclusion or anti-racism, but at least we had a good start there. Then there were a couple of transformative experiences. In 2016, a group called the Springfield Coalition on Dismantling Racism had partnered with an organization called Crossroads to give training in dismantling systemic racism. And we made the decision at that time to send 50 people from the School of Medicine to this seminar, 2.5 days. It was a real commitment, and it was an eye opener for all of us. It really got things started. And actually, there were a lot of things there, but they had a 6-point continuing for becoming an anti-racist organization. I've got it here in my hand. It really set the tone for what we wanted to do. So in order, they are 1, exclusive, a segregated institution; 2, passive, a club institution; 3, symbolic change, multicultural institution; 4, identity change, anti-racist institution; 5, structural change, transformed institution; 6, fully inclusive, transformed institution in a transformed society. We checked off the boxes at level 2 with 1 box in level 3 at that point. And again, we also had known from our hotspotting and what we'd done with our patient-centered medical homes that being proximate in the community with community health workers was a way to understand the mistrust that was there. So we had a practical example that worked with that as well. So anyway, the practical action steps that were taken starting in 2016 was the establishment of the position of Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion. So that first Associate Dean was Wes McNeese. Shortly thereafter, when he retired, we renamed it Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Wendy Alameen was the first dean with that title and has done a great job. Even though the budget is still meager, it is meager, it has expanded dramatically. We've added faculty and staff, and symbolically, we moved the offices right down the hallway from the dean's area, from a fairly remote area, which I think helped some things as well. We did commit to becoming an anti-racist organization in early 2019, January, I think, and then it became part of our strategic planning process for the year, and our strategic plan came out in 2020. So as part of that plan, we developed an anti-racism task force, which has really been a great action step. Broad participation across the organization with 4 subcommittees to look at benchmarks and metrics in medicine, and with positive outcomes there, to look at 2, training, to examine it carefully to make sure that we're not perpetuating values that we don't want to. The third one is policies and procedures, and the fourth one is organizational analysis. So those are helping. Programs started. Dr. Alameen started Equity Ambassadors program to get on the ground in the various departments. We hired a trauma mitigation specialist. I think we might be the first medical school to do that in the country. A director of research and innovation, culturally responsive health initiative. And then on the education side, about 12 years ago, we started our pipeline program for freshman high school students who do 4 years in our P4 program. Most of them from underrepresented groups, and we've actually got a couple of them in medical school now after the whole process. Anyway, with these actions, we've seen the culture start to change. We're really aiming for a big chemistry change too. I think that's a little harder, but those are some of the things we've done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cruz. A lot of trailblazing moments and activities, and very comprehensive as you talk about the inception of the medical med prep program, as well as the trauma litigation specialist. I heard just really redefining identity as well as structure. And I know that that's a big part of the anti-racism initiative. So I just really appreciate your comprehensive thoughts and action steps. And now with that, I would like to ask Dr. Lane, Chancellor Lane, the same question: concrete action steps for the Carbondale campus with respect to advancing anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Caldwell. And, my comments, just to kind of give you a storyline, I arrived in July of 2020. Actually, I think Dr. Mahoney and the board approved me in May, right after the death of George Floyd, which, by the way, the neighborhood where George Floyd grew up was across the street from my campus at Texas Southern University. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of activity when I was back home before actually coming here. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure I didn't do when I arrived was to start barking out any directions as related to D&I, because emotions were running really high at that time. And I was not familiar with our environment here. And so I intentionally came in and did a lot of listening and a lot of learning to try and start some healing, which needed to occur. I think a day after I arrived, we had a couple of racial incidents on campus, in our residential facilities, and a lot of things that received some attention in the media. And so I arrived with some assumptions, but I thought, well, I've got to listen to a lot of folks that are here first. And that's what I set out to do. One of the first things that I wanted to get a handle on was who are the constituency groups around campus that represent some of our groups that would really be talking about some of the DE&I initiatives or things that we needed to be focused on. One of the things that we launched immediately was the Chancellor's Task Force, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force on our campus. Started that work pretty quickly. I found, after talking with our Black Faculty Staff Council and our Hispanic Latino Staff Faculty Council, that they were not recognized as our constituency groups. They didn't have any recognition as being that, and worked directly with both of those groups. Really pleased to report one of the action steps is that we are now recognized. Those two groups are recognized. And really hats off to all of the folks, Dr. Greer and Mr. Lester and Rob Lopez and others who worked hand in hand with me in getting those councils established. We also added them to our leadership council. That is the leadership council of deans, vice chancellors, and other leaders across our university, where they have a voice at that table. Another group we added was our new group, our Network of Empowering Women. And we also have a representative, or the president. Sandy serves as our president now, but she too is on the leadership council. We had Todd Bryson did a great job for us in working as our interim associate vice chancellor for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we elevated that position to vice chancellor for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Dr. Frazier is in that role right now and doing a really good job. Some of the things that are going to help us sustain these efforts, and I'll mention a few more here in just a second, but our biggest fear was that this would be a fad, and that we would only be talking about this for a few months, and then it would kind of die down and go away, and people would forget. So we wanted to be able to sustain these efforts. And one of the ways I think we're going to be able to do that here is that we launched our strategic plan a couple of weeks ago, Imagine SIU-C in 2030. Our top 5 pillar, one of the top 5 pillars is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Inside of that pillar, you'll see a lot of measures and targets that I think we'll talk about later on this call that will be focused on in the next few years, with really trying to move the needle in some critical areas. And so from we're in the infancy stage of really being able to launch out a lot of things that we're finding we need to work on. But we do have the foundation in place. We've got the staff in place. We've got the measures and our targets in place. It's inside of a plan that I think is going to help us sustain those efforts. But we continue to listen and learn from the folks that are here, and always ready to pivot at any time. And so I'll stop there. And I know we've got some other key areas of things that we have done here with developing some of our training modules, We just had our annual women's conference that's going really well, and just a lot of work with our students with Diversity Week and other things that we've been putting together. But still out of the gate, we're feeling good, but we've got some work to do, but still promising.
So much, Chancellor Lane. As you were talking, I heard wise, thoughtful, deliberative leadership. So those were some of my takeaways. Just knowing at the time you came and having to deal with several crises and doing them well as you responded to catalytic events. And what I especially appreciate you sharing about sustainability, because again, this is not a fad. Diverse people are here to stay. We're here to stay. And so we do want this work to be enduring. So as you speak about the foundation, the employees in place, the metrics, the strategic plan, all of those efforts are going to help us be sustainable. And again, as you say, we can't do it by ourselves. So I especially appreciate Dr. Elamine at the School of Medicine, Dr. Frazier, Carbondale campus, Dr. Jessica Harris, and so many others who are leading these efforts, specifically also at the Edwardsville campus. And so having said that, I would like to turn it over to our Edwardsville leader, Dr. Miner, if you could speak about concrete action steps taken to advance anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. It's great to be here, and I can't help but to comment on how unusual and atypical, but also extraordinarily positive to have this kind of leadership gathered on this topic. And I hope people appreciate how rare this is in higher education, I think. So I just want to commend President Mahoney and Dr. Caldwell for your leadership on this issue. I found it quite interesting that both Dr. Cruz and Chancellor Lane began with a time marker, right? This sort of moment in time. And for me, I want to start the same way because it's day 28, right? And to answer this kind of question so early in my tenure here is interesting. But the reason I mention that is because I argue that my eyes are fairly fresh. And I think you see things with fresh eyes that maybe you miss when you've been a part of a university community for a very long time. So let me just talk about what I see on day 28. And there are three things that I think we are paying attention to right away. One has to do with messaging, the other has to do with mechanics, and then the third has to do with measuring metrics, right? On the messaging, one of the things that I just found extraordinarily just interesting is that when the announcement was made that I serve as the 10th chancellor, I got a lot of phone calls, but before people called, they went to the website, they did their research so that when they called, they could talk about SIUE. And one of the things that I didn't expect is that it became an informal feedback loop about what people saw. And I thought that was interesting. So part of the messaging is not just the symbolism of the leader speaking to the issue, it's also about the visual cues that we send to people about who we are as a university community. And so those are the two things that we are focusing on. One is the messaging. Some of you all know we have had incidents of racial bias on this campus. That's no secret. As early as February 23rd, you all know we held a town hall, and it was a very, I'd say in most cases, risky endeavor to weigh in so early before even my official start date. But I thought it was important that I, as the next leader of the institution, message on this issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. So one is that we want to get the messaging right. The other has to do with mechanics. And that is, are there things that we do in this university community that work programmatically, that advance our cause and our mission? And to be very clear, to honestly ask if there are things that we should discontinue. And those are not always easy conversations in university communities, but I think we have to pay attention to what we do mechanically, programmatically, administratively. And then measuring. I think it's very risky, Dr. Caldwell, to be less than clear about what we want to accomplish. And so we are in the process of refining our strategic plan. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is to have very clear goals and very clear metrics to measure our progress annually. So I could talk at length about a few of the programs that we have, but those are the three things that we're focusing on early is how we message and communicate to our community, what those mechanics are, and how are we going to measure the right set of metrics to determine our progress from year to year.
Thank you, Dr. Miner. And I would just like to say, I'm pretty sure your fresh set of eyes, like you said, is definitely well received because, again, I do believe a big part of leadership is asking the right questions, and you seem to be stepping in and doing that well. And I know that there's a strong appreciation for your clarity of thoughts and you issuing a clarion call in your leadership. So again, we're so pleased to have you and looking forward to hearing even more in the future about the wonderful work that Edwardsville will accomplish in ADEI work and beyond. So again, happy you're here. And definitely last but not least, we have Dr. Mahoney. And just also, he is going to wrap up this particular topic as far as concrete action steps. And I know me coming in, I do want to just affirm what Dr. Miner said, just listening and understanding Dr. Mahoney's vision. Me working in higher ed for over 25 years, what we are witnessing today is unprecedented as far as the focus on ADEI efforts. It is unusual, atypical, rare, but overwhelmingly positive. And so I'm so pleased that we have a leader in Dan Mahoney who is leading those efforts. So Dr. Mahoney, if you could share about concrete action steps the system has taken to advance anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Caldwell. So I'll talk about just a few things. Certainly, much like happened on the campuses, we had an anti-racism task force that came up with a list of strategies and ideas, and we have been working through that list really ever since then. Certainly, one of the things I think when I got here, we didn't really have a chief diversity officer of the system. Dr. McNeese was in a role that helped support me in that area. I think my first meeting with him, he talked about the need for establishing that chief diversity officer position and having someone who really was part of our leadership team on a consistent basis. So the creation of Dr. Caldwell's role was another step that we took. We also started working on an ADEI scorecard. So a way that we could assess how we're doing from a recruitment, retention, graduation rate, salary, satisfaction. Really, it's a pretty comprehensive, I think one of the most comprehensive scorecards I've seen relative to this work that we're going to be using going forward. But not waiting till that was done, we tried to make changes immediately in some of the things we were doing, even thinking about recruitment. We certainly have seen a change in the diversity of our leadership, and I think it's because we've been doing recruitment in a different way, and that's been, I think, a very conscious decision on our part. And we're looking at doing things that will help us going forward. We actually joined the Southern Region Education Board's Compact for Faculty Diversity, which is really one of the biggest gatherings of minority PhDs in the country, and we're now part of that, and actually had our first student graduate from the Carbondale campus just this past year. That also was with recruiting as well. We're working right now on changing some of the civil service rules, which have also been sometimes hindering our efforts to increase diversity there. Looking at, from a student standpoint, things we can do in order to improve the recruitment and retention of students. We have a professional schools admissions task force that we've been working on and coming up with things we can change there. We actually removed the use of test scores for merit scholarships. I thought that was a key thing. We know a lot of the issues we have relative to both recruitment and retention of diverse students relates to financial reasons. And so taking out something that really doesn't predict success seemed to make sense to us. That was something we could do fairly quickly. We did declare our commitment to be an anti-racist institution, as you talked about, and that is a major goal within our strategic plan. So we have a lot of strategies that are in there that we'll continue to work on going forward. And we do have a statement that was approved by the board as kind of declaring the institution as an anti-racist institution. So we're doing that, as well as the leadership certificate that we're working on, trainings that we're working on, the campus climate survey that's currently going on. So there's a lot of things we're doing, and a lot of what we're doing right now is planning for those things, but also collecting data that will help us do better going forward. I think going back to one of the things Chancellor Lane said is we didn't want this just to be a short thing that we did and went away. I think even having these conversations of understanding is keeping this at the forefront of what we talk about on a regular basis was one of the things we decided early on we wanted to do. And while I've seen a lot of institutions not really make a lot of steps forward since May of 2020, I think we've continued to and have plans to do far more because we haven't left it behind. We've really made sure that it wasn't, again, simply something that was short-lived.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahoney, and I appreciated the way you ended that because one of the conversations I recall us having is actually looking back over the death of George Floyd is that we want to be one of those institutions that don't, I would say, have optimistic platitudes and don't deliver. And I think one of the things that's been made clear is that there is a cohesive vision from the top, including the Board of Trustees, Dr. Mahoney, and you can see that it's just aligned throughout. And I think because of those unifying efforts that, again, we're going to be able to have a great influence, power, and really improve all of those areas that you spoke about when it comes to retention, recruitment, promotion, and just efforts that have already been made to advance equity and to ensure our students are successful. And it just goes without saying, that's why we are here. All of our efforts are really designed, again, for the whole environment, but just to make sure the students are successful. And so again, you really outline very specific action steps that will advance and ensure that. And with that, the next question has also been presented to you, Dr. Mahoney. As you mentioned all these initiatives, in your 2 years as SIU system president, what has been your biggest obstacle to successfully implementing anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the system?
Yeah, the biggest obstacle is change takes time. Particularly important change. If it was quick and easy, people would have done it a long time ago. And that's particularly true, I think, at my level. A lot of things we talk about needing to change and say it's admissions policies, tenure promotion policies. Sometimes it's not even the policies, it's how we implement those policies that are problematic. And changing that all from my level, it can't be done alone. It really is a group effort, and group efforts take more time. We have a deep commitment, obviously, to shared governance, but shared governance is a longer process than simply a leader at the top deciding just to change everything entirely on his or her own. That being said, I'm not anti-shared governance. I actually think we come up with better ideas, better plans, and do a better job because we are listening to a lot of voices and we are developing, I think, more thoughtful plans that will help us over the long term. But I think that the biggest struggle is, and again, it's everything from looking at policies that maybe need to be changed and how long that process takes versus, I mentioned the scorecard. When you haven't been collecting data on things for a long period of time and you have multiple campuses in the system, getting just the data that you can rely on to make decisions isn't something that's quick and easy to do. It just takes more time.
Thank you. I agree with all of that. Again, we all do definitely want to be data and evidence-based in the work we do. And again, as you said, that takes time. As you were talking, I did want to just kind of bring up a proverb that says, if you want to go quickly, go along. If you want to go further, go together. And so you just described that perfectly. We want to go far in this work. And so we definitely believe in buy-in and bringing everyone along. And again, you have done that very well during your tenure here. And now I have another question to present to all of the panelists. Can you please share what should each campus work on to advance ADEI initiatives and inclusion? And then Chancellor Lane, if I could present that question to you, thinking about what campus communities can do to work on it. And we talked about how we cannot do it by ourselves. So what should the campus do to advance this work and these efforts?
Yeah, for us, it's a term we use a lot over here as we crafted the Imagine plan. You can't be a skeptic on the sideline. And let me explain. I never had any real thoughts about, or no formal thoughts about when I arrived what we would do with ADE&I. And I made a point to really try and create more of a shared vision, to hear more voices instead of me just coming in and giving my thoughts and opinions on, what I think we need to be doing. In all fairness, I think we had a lot of our faculty, staff, and students here that didn't know what direction we wanted to head as an institution. Our last strategic plan was in 2014. There was no real discussion. As you heard the president mention, there was really nothing coming from above at a 30,000 foot from system level in terms of the work that we're talking about today. You heard Chancellor Minor open up with how refreshing it was to even have these conversations. I totally agree. I don't think I've ever had this kind of conversation this extensively in my 20 some odd years of doing this work. So it is very refreshing. So I think some of the work going forward, we talk also about accountability, especially with our leadership. So some of the expectations that I have with my vice chancellors and our deans and others that are here is that they start to talk through some of the strategic action steps that they need to put in place to show really what we're talking about today, right, is show progress so that we can actually communicate that to the masses and that they know, they being faculty, staff, and or students know exactly what goals we're trying to reach together. So I think, that's probably the biggest takeaway for me is that everyone has to help out. It cannot just be the chancellor's AD, E&I pillar or the chancellor's strategic plan. We've got to make sure everyone knows where they fit within their unit and how effective that they can be with helping us achieve the goal.
Thank you, Chancellor Lane. Accountability, I also heard transparency. I think that's also a big part of this work as well. So thank you for sharing about those efforts. And now I'm going to move on with Dean Cruz. If you could speak about the School of Medicine and what they're working on and what they can work on to advance ADEI efforts.
Yes, I'll echo one thing that Chancellor Lane just said. We are so happy that the system is working on this together and we can learn from each other. It is a great help to us. I think we learned early on that having a broad swath of people participating in anti-racism training, either the long ones for dismantling racism and recognizing implicit bias, we've still got a long way to go to get more people involved in that, but we want to take those steps. You summarized one of the things that I said, Dr. Caldwell. You said the structural issues. When we saw that training, the ingrained hierarchy of the white male privilege and power became apparent, and that's not always easy for white men to understand. I'll tell you. And so the policies and procedures and educational materials and search committees and promotion and tenure committees and metrics and all of those things, that's a big focus of what we want to do. And then emphasizing what the students have to say is a big one too. We have a group called the Marginalized Student Network, which brought 5 groups together, 2 for women, 1 for Latino, 1 for LGBTQ+, and 1 for African American Black students who are a powerful voice. And that, presented me a document that I look at frequently. I'll probably need to give them an update pretty soon. I think actually Chancellor Lane and President Mahoney were in on that first discussion that we had, and it was a good one. But those are the important things that we're, among other things, but those are the ones that just come to my mind.
Thank you so much, Dean Cruz. And I did one thing I wanted to highlight is that you did mention the specific groups. I do believe as we talk about solving problems that we have to be clear about naming issues. So as you talk about women, Latinx, Hispanic, LGBTQIA, African American, Blacks, as well as people with disabilities. I mean, these are all the groups that we know through the data that don't always perform well, not just on our SIU campuses, but throughout society as a whole. And so we are committed to elevating these groups and meeting their needs and making sure that equity is there. So I just appreciate those specific mentions because I want people to know we see you. It's not diversity generally, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, and anti-racism specifically. And those are the groups that the data reveals to us that we need to emphasize and make sure that they're not on the margins. So thank you for that information. And now I will go to Dr. Minor. If you can also speak about, with your fresh eyes, what initiatives that the campus can work on at Edwardsville to advance ADEI efforts.
So thanks for the question. I want to mention just 2 things very quickly. The first for us has to really be about raising the level of communal awareness about where we are today. So I launched this listening tour, and for Dean Cruz and Chancellor Lane, I think that is just necessary, right? To listen as much as you can from various constituents in every corner of the university. And so as committed as I am to doing that, I'm also testing our communal knowledge and level of awareness about where we are today. So let's just take one issue like faculty diversity. I think most people will go, yeah, that's a good thing, is to have a rich and diverse faculty. But if you stopped 100 people walking across this campus who reasonably should know what the composition of our faculty are today, how many people would be able to opine or even be close? And that's what I mean. And I think one way to focus a community is to be clear about where we are and to be clear about our idea in terms of where we want to go. So number one for us is just raising the level of communal awareness in terms of where we are on all things equity, right? Faculty diversity, student success, particular outcomes, representation in particular majors. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So that's one. The other is to pay attention to the areas of success. So some of you all may know about our SOAR, Fame, and Gain programs. It's one of the sources or areas of pride for this university. And we recently had probably as good data as you can have on any program of this type that suggests that students who are participating in these programs have a much higher probability of being retained and actually hitting those key hallmarks for student success. And I asked the question about how students get to participate in this program. And they went, well, here's how it works. And one of the things that just stood out to me is that if it was true that students are benefiting so significantly from the program, how could it be that all students who were eligible, who could benefit from that program, were not participating? So I think the other thing is to be able to double down based on the data, based on the intelligence of the community in areas where we've had a lot of success.
Yeah, Dr. Minor, scaling those efforts, I think like you said, is very important. And also it's difficult to talk about problems if we don't see the same things and if we don't know the same things. So I think raising that communal awareness is key to advancing this work. So I appreciate that mindset as well. And Dr. Mahoney, if you can conclude for this particular question about what we can work on as a system to advance ADEI efforts.
Yeah, and I think our goals a lot of times are the same across the system. So it's relative to student recruitment and success, employee recruitment and success, and making sure that those are equitable. I think it's providing education on topics related to ADEI. I think what we do at the system is always trying to balance what is best for us to kind of take off the shoulders of the campus. So if we, for example, the campus climate survey, we can take the lead on working together to do that across the system. Doesn't mean the campus doesn't have to do anything, but we can do a bulk of the work on that. We can do a bulk of the work on finding the best training opportunities and then work with the campuses to implement them. So we're always looking at where can we help support. But I think what Dean Cruz said, which I think is critically important too, is when things are successful, and Dr. Minor just talked about some of those successes, is that we share those ideas across the campus. So, why is, Fame and Game and SOAR working so effectively? What can we learn from that? It doesn't mean we have to do exactly the same program at Carbondale in the School of Medicine, but where there's something there that we can learn from that may be beneficial to our efforts to, again, get more students not only in the door, but to graduation, which is really our biggest goal.
So much, Dr. Mahoney. I appreciate that. Like you said, there is an intent focus, but as far as the summary, as me being a fellow system office employee, I think we're like-minded because our goal is to work alongside the campuses and think about how we could be deliberate and proactive in relieving burdens, also supporting the campus community, and also I would say creating, looking at structures and how we could, again, lead in those efforts and support the campuses. So thank you for sharing that specific work with the system office employees. The next question that we have is actually specifically for Dr. Dan Mahoney and Dr. Austin Lane. And the question reads, prior to coming to SIU, you had a vision for ADEI initiatives. Within the past 2 years, have you modified or redirected your vision or purpose? And I'm gonna start that question with Dr. Mahoney.
Okay, yeah, yes and no. So in some ways, a lot of the things that we're working on here are things I've been working on for a long period of time at other places, but I am committed to being a lifelong learner. So I'm always learning new things. I'm always seeing things that other places are doing that are effective. I'm learning from really listening to the people on each campus and across the system about things. So it does modify in some ways. I probably use the word anti-racism more than I did a couple of years ago, just because I think it really puts us focused on being more proactive and an active approach, which not that I hadn't done in the past, but I maybe didn't use that term to describe it as much. So in some ways, it hasn't really dramatically changed. It's been more modified, probably is a better way to put it. I think the thing that probably has most dramatically changed for me is the feeling that I can do it here. I haven't always been in situations where I felt like I could do some of the things that and say some of the things that I wanted to say and do some of the things that I wanted to do, but having the support of the board that I have here, having I think a lot of legislator and elected official support for some of the things that we're working on, and being surrounded by people who have in many ways more expertise than I do on some of these topics and better ideas. I think we have an opportunity to do something particularly special and impactful. And I'm not sure I've ever been in a place where I felt like I had all of those pieces together quite the same way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was great. Like you said, it's possible here. I think a lot of us feel that mentality and that energy that the ideas that are being presented by ADEI efforts are not just verbiage or talk, but as you can see from the level of commitment and the concrete action steps, we can actually make it happen. So Chancellor Lane, the same question. Have you modified or redirected your vision or purpose over the past 2 years as it relates to ADEI?
Yeah, I don't know if I've modified or it's probably more of enhanced. Again, as when I arrived, I listened to a lot of folks that gave me the good, the bad, and the ugly. And a lot of that ugly was really dedicated to the topic we're talking about today with how people were feeling and what they wanted to see addressed and or changed. And so I think just enhancing and looking at how we do things, whether it's from a policy perspective or process, and then serving our people, I think is probably the biggest thing I came out of that listening and learning tour with, is how to better serve the folks that are here so that they can enjoy being here and not leaving and going somewhere else, which is what I heard a lot of when I arrived, is people were leaving because of the environment. They were leaving because of the climate. That's why I'm very glad to see you and Dr. Mahoney launch the climate survey, so we can find out even more about things that we can do to enhance. So, again, that 1.75 years that I've been here, I think it's really given me an opportunity to continue to meet with those constituency leaders in all of the groups that we were talking about earlier, and continue to make sure that we can sustain these efforts that are here and they not disappear.
Thank you, Chancellor Lane. I agree that I think all of us have heard the word learning quite a few times, and that's the operative word. And as we talk about vision, how you communicate to us and the things that you share, we do use that to direct our vision. And so I want to use this moment to issue a shameless plug for those of you who have not had an opportunity to fill out the climate survey, because that is an opportunity that's going on right now until April 14th for you to share about your experiences, your perspectives, and how you feel about the campus community. And that is for Carbondale, Edwardsville, the School of Medicine, East St. Louis campus, faculty, staff, students, administrators. So we highly encourage you to give us that feedback, because we will be listening and we will be strategizing based on how you communicate those issues to us. So thank you for that. The next question that we have from for our panelists is, what are your thoughts on striking the balance between anti-racism and inclusivity and our obligations as a public university by honoring the free rights in all of our community? And so with that question, I'm actually going to start again with Dr. Mahoney, balancing anti-racism, inclusivity, and honoring free speech.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things I would say on that. One is that we're certainly always open to listening to dissenting voices on any particular issue, and I think that that's part of what universities do. But I would say a couple of things also related to that. One is we cannot wait till we all agree to make change. I remember I followed someone in a position once, and he said famously to the faculty, unless we all agree, we can't move forward. Well, those 180 faculty, they were never going to agree on anything. So you're never going to move forward on anything if we're waiting for unanimous support for something. So we know that there will be disagreements certainly at times. I think when we're talking about those, people certainly have the right to their opinion or their views on a variety of topics. But that doesn't mean that while there may not be some repercussions, there may be other repercussions for having certain viewpoints, and you can't control how people may feel about you based on those viewpoints. There's certain things that happen as a result of those viewpoints, but also you may be challenged on those viewpoints. So just having a viewpoint, we sometimes, I think, act like the First Amendment gives us a right to have all viewpoints be entirely equal. Some are based on good research and data, and some are not at all based on good research and data. And so if you have a opinion that's contradictory to some of the things we're working on, and there's no support for that, I not only have the right, but probably the obligation in an educational institution to challenge you on that and say there is no real support for that, give me that support. And so when I look at higher education and our focus on anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of it's based on the research that I have read, and I've read quite a bit of the research. A lot of it's based on the data, both our own data and data across the country. And I'll just give you kind of a few things. University presidents right now are 70% men and 80% white. Medical school deans are 84% men. Senior leadership at universities is 60% male and 87% white. Full professors are 68% male, 80% white, and actually 53% white males. 75% of faculty are white. If you can look at that data and not say we have an issue, then I'm going to challenge you on that, because to me that seems to be not equity. It's not an inclusive environment, and we need to do better as higher education institutions as a whole. Now, that's not our SIU data, but I know in some cases our SIU data is not inconsistent with that. And so I think, again, I'm open to people having different views, but they should be able to support those different views with some type of research and data. And if they can't, I certainly will challenge them on that.
Thank you, Dr. Mahoney, for just even reinforcing our mission in that our goal is to obviously create people who have advanced cognitive thinking skills, who understand the difference between opinion, fact, and evidence, and even for sharing those facts, because like you said, that data does tell a story, and we need to pay attention to it because it's not a story of equity, and that's what we're striving towards. Okay. Do any one of our panelists want to hop in on that question before we move on, as far as free speech and inclusivity? Thank you. So I actually want to move on. We have time for a few more questions before we move to our Q&A with our participants who we are so pleased who are here today. And if you haven't had an opportunity, please send questions through the chat and we will be responding to those momentarily. But my next question, and this is for all of our panelists, I think we would want to know the response to this. If you could be instantly given one wish regarding your job at SIU, what would that wish be? And I'm going to start with Dean Cruz. He's mine.
Okay. I'm going to be a little practical with this one because we're right in the midst of our big accreditation survey with the Liaison Committee on Medical Education. Actually, we have more than 50 programs that get accredited here at the school. And, you know, I've said in meetings before that all deans need to make sure that everything's accredited and there's enough money to do things, right? In order to support your mission and vision and all the things that that you were wanting to do. So this is what I would say. I would say that I would hope that all accrediting, certifying, licensing committees would mandate equity, diversity, and inclusion in what they do. All of these things, all of the ones that I mentioned for medicine, are self-perpetuating bodies that function at local, state, and national levels. They don't have common missions, visions, or strategies. And the current arrangement actually perpetuates educational systems that are less effective, less efficient, less enjoyable. And because they perpetuate existing systems and the hierarchies that I mentioned before. So I would, if I had one wish, it would bring all of them together so that they could have a focus and, get that across in an unfragmented kind of way.
Thank you. I wish you ever start a petition, I second that wish. That was great. Thank you for sharing that. And now I will go to Chancellor Lane. If you have one wish regarding your job at SIU, what would that be?
Mine would probably be to be recognized maybe by the Chronicle of Higher Ed or another noted vehicle out there on the best places to work. So my wish would probably center around morale and making sure that we had a campus of faculty and staff with high morale, energized on our strategic plan and the efforts that we're trying to achieve, because I know selfishly that's going to help my students. If that happens, if that occurs, I know that people are happy coming to work, feeling like they're making a difference. They understand the difference they're making and how it is impacting our future leaders, our students, is going to go a long way. So that would probably be my wish, centered around morale and really folks wanting to be here, feeling like it's a safe place. It's a very understanding place, or a place that really values their employees, what we do.
Thank you so much. I know you used the word selfish, but I would say that's a very generous mindset to just want people to come into an environment where they have a sense of belonging, where they feel welcome, respected, included, and valued for their contributions. And I mean, that's really my desire too, as I do this work, is that's what it's all about. Is do we want to get up, go to work, be happy, and contribute well? So I think that's a desire of all of ours. So thank you for saying that so eloquently. Dr. Miner, if you could share about one wish as the new chancellor at SIUE, what would that be?
So thank you for the question. I had about 2.5 minutes to sift my list down from 6 to one wish. So I think the thing that I would wish for is a real opportunity to do the work that's required to realize change with support. And I say that because I want to be realistic about what's required to realize the outcomes that we all seek. I like to say everybody likes change except for the change part. And I think we have to be realistic about the path we have to take in order to really improve the climate on our campuses and to really change the composition of individuals who are part of this university community. And to do that in a way that doesn't displace people, that doesn't alienate people, but to do it in a way where you can move forward in a university, as a university community. It's not an easy thing. And I think President Mahoney alluded to this early on in the conversation. And so I just want to acknowledge the fact that there will be difficult moments along the way. There will be difficult choices along the way. And just the opportunity to do the work that's required with support would be my one wish.
Thank you, Dr. Miner. Those are sobering words. And like you said, I believe it's possible, but it's also a radical idea for those of us who try to effectuate change. It doesn't come easily or naturally, and it is a road ahead. But again, I think with the people who are gathered here today, I'm probably more optimistic than I've ever been in my 25 years working in higher ed. So I'm pleased to take that journey with each of you. And Dr. Mahoney, as the system office leader, if you had one wish regarding your job, what would that be?
I was going to say, I'd go back to one of my earlier answers, and everything would move so much faster. That would be my biggest wish. But I think it's, and I'll pick up on something Chancellor Minor talked about. To me, when I think about higher education and what's our number one goal, it's to provide every student an opportunity to get to graduation and to finish a degree here and be successful. To me, that's everything else. And I think that when we look at some of our data right now, we need to make changes. I think my one wish would be everybody be open to those changes and learning from others and from each other about how we might be able to do that better, and really be committed to that as that, again, primary goal as an institution, is that every student who walks in here, we've talked about this before. I've been in higher education teaching for, 30 years, almost 30 years now. And I think in 30 years, I maybe had 2 or 3 students who I doubted could actually get to graduation. That's one every decade. My belief is that pretty much every student who walks in here is capable and able to get there. And it's our real responsibility to find a way to get there. And again, I think just everybody being open to whatever change we need to make in order to help that along and increase those graduation rates and increase student success, that would be my biggest wish.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's a wish that would benefit not just SIU, but society, community, the world. So we all definitely reinforce and echo that wish, that we believe in our students, and we know that if they were accepted and came through our front doors, that they're fully capable of earning a degree and a credential from one of our campuses. So that's a wonderful wish. With that, if we could just take a few moments, and if you could speak to your vision, what do you see all of our anti-racism, diversity, equity efforts leading? And to this end, what do you hope that your campus will achieve within the next 5 years? Or for Dr. Mahoney, what do you hope that we will achieve as a system? And I'm actually going to start this question with Dr. Mahoney. Again, what do you see our ADEI efforts leading? And what do you hope we achieve as a system in the next 5 years?
Yeah, and I've said this several times, but it hasn't really changed. I think from the start of this effort a couple of years ago, I really wanted us to become a national model where other institutions would look to what we're doing. So we're being effective enough in everything from our assessment to our training to our educational opportunities to student success to, again, recruiting, retaining employees, that we're doing a good enough job in all of those areas in some really measurable ways that other people start to see us as a national model. And I think that does 2 things. One is it reflects well on our system. It reflects well on SIU. I think that would help us, again, in recruiting and retaining students and employees in the future. But also my hope is that we can start to influence some of those other institutions. I've never come up with an idea in this area that I wasn't willing to share with anybody who asked. And I'm hopeful that in 5 years from now, we have done enough good work that others will ask to look at what we're doing, and we'll actually start to model and copy some of those things that have been effective for our students and our employees. So that would be my hope.
Thank you so much. And again, I agree with that. That's one of my visions in this role too, is that we actually create a body of work where we can be a model. And again, we can share those effective practices with other institutions. Dr. Minor, if you can actually share in the next 5 years, what do you hope to see the Edwardsville campus?
I'm on a channel, President Mahoney. It's hard for me to think about the next 5 years. So I'm thinking about what we will accomplish this year. But if I had to think about it that way, it's really maybe 3 things. One is that we as a community have extraordinarily clear values, that we as a community are clear about what our values are on this set of issues. The second is that we're far more diverse as a university community. I think people determine the culture of a place. And one of, I think, the quickest ways to change the culture of a place is to invite more diverse views and representation into the community. The third I would mention just quickly is that we are keenly focused on equity in every corner of our institution. It's not just who gets tenure and promoted, it's who's on the dean's list, what the representation is in STEM fields, and that we as a community have a practice of examining equity gaps and working to ensure that we address them. And then the last thing I would hope is that we become very proficient as a university at communicating and managing issues of racial bias, issues of sexism, homophobia, whatever those things are, when they arise. I think it's risky to aspire that those things will never happen. I think if they happen in larger society, the idea that university communities are a microcosm of those, or of larger communities. And so those things may arise from time to time. My hope is that we have much greater capacity to communicate about them when they arise and to manage and litigate them in a way that upholds our values.
Thank you for sharing that, Chancellor Minor. And I think as we, as you said, growing that capacity, that we will have people who suffer less and experience harm, because that's usually the outcome when we don't manage those issues well. And so that's another desire, is that we do want people to be treated well on our campuses here. So thank you for that feedback. I'm trying to think. Dr. Lane, if you can also speak to ADEI efforts and what you foresee for Carbondale campus within the next 5 years.
Yeah, I really am hoping that we have our frameworks in place through our strategic planning efforts. We're calling them unit effectiveness plans that live from year to year, so we can evaluate our success and get better and better every year. In those categories, and I think you've heard it mentioned by President Mahoney and Chancellor Minor, but as relates to students, I'm hoping in the next 5 years that we become even more diverse on campus, that we have students that we're attracting from all across our state, all across our country, across the world, that feel like because of our efforts, they want to be here, because they know we are one of the few universities that's focused on this work. So that we are this national or international model for students, for faculty. I'd love to see the inside of the ranks of faculty, much more diversity in those ranks, and that not only are we attracting diverse faculty, but that we're retaining those faculty, and that they feel like this is a place that's safe and a place that they can shine. So really excited. And same thing about staff. I'm hoping that staff understand exactly the difference that they're making and how they fit within the overall plan, and that their morale, I think I've mentioned that a few times, it's high morale and work that they feel like without them, we couldn't get it done. So just those areas, I'd probably say where we'd like to be in the next 5 years, but closely watching it every year.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. Again, it's been very consistent as far as your vision for definitely creating a very strong, welcoming, and inclusive environment. And so I think about building ADEI environment so people who are here, faculty, staff, students, can stay. And then we're also building, because we know if we build, they will come. And so we want more and more students to come and be sustainable and to be graduates and alumni of our campus. So again, I believe that's exactly where our ADEI efforts are heading. And last but not least, Dr. Cruz, if you could share where you see the School of Medicine within the next 5 years.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to go back to the crossroads, 6-point continuum on becoming anti-racist institution. You know, in 2016, we were solidly a 2, scratching the surface of a 3. And, you know, we solidly do 3 now and are into 4, which is an anti-racist institution. In the next 5 years, I would hope that we would really solidly be in number 5, structural change, a transforming institution. And I'm going to read 2 of the 7 points under that one. One is implement structures, policies, practices, and inclusive decision-making and other forms of power sharing on all levels of the institution's life and work. So I think implements and power sharing are the important ones there. And then commits to struggle to dismantle racism in the wider community and builds clear lines of accountability to racially oppressed communities. So our local community, our community of universities, both, I think that's been mentioned 3 times in this already. I think it's really important. So I would hope that others would recognize our cultural change. It takes time. And as I was listening to, it's NCAA basketball time, right? So I was listening to ESPN radio, and one of the commentators said, the teams that make it to the Final Four for Division I have great culture and great chemistry. And I think if you look at Duke and UNC and KU and Villanova, they all have that culture that everybody recognizes. But I think through the year, you see that these teams developed chemistry. So I want the culture overall, but every group that comes into this organization, because people come and people go, the proximity in work life, in social life, building that chemistry, that would make me smile.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think one of the examples that you share, which I think is great, as you talk about your vision for 5 years, is that we get to see, even speaking to Dr. Mahoney's point, that we want these efforts to accelerate as quickly as possible. The more expeditious, the better. But as you talk about your timeline, where you were in quadrant 2 in 2016, and now you're 3 going into 4 in 2022, I think that's just a perfect example when we think about a timeline, or how it just takes effort, and we want to continuously improve over time so that we can see that progress being made. So we just appreciate you even sharing those benchmarks and that data, because it gives us a vision about where we can all aspire to as well. So that was very helpful. Thank you, Dr. Cruz, for that information. And so with that, it is about 1:06, and I am actually now going to transition to the questions that we have in the chat. And the first question that we have, and I think at this point, it may be the primary question that we have for all of our panelists today, is what do we do with tenure track professors that are blatant with their racism, but feel protected to do so because they have tenure? So again, the question is centered around people who basically have earned tenure and feel like that protects them when they espouse racist comments or treatment among team members, whether it be faculty, staff, or students. How will we deal with that as a system, as a campus community? And I'm actually going to open that up to whichever panelists feel most comfortable speaking to that topic at this point. Dr. Cruz.
Yeah, Dr. Caldwell, I am. So, we really do first need to understand what free speech is and what tenure means, quite frankly. And I'll just say, we must absolutely not tolerate anti-racist and biased behavior, either overt or implicit. We can't. And I don't know, I just say, for those who hold anti-racist belief and they're not trying to overcome them, I would hope that for us, that the School of Medicine would not be a very comfortable place for them to work. Now I know that with the tenure, there's all kinds of processes that would need to take place, but we don't have this at the School of Medicine. But we have discussed having either a 5 or 7 or a 10-year tenure review, and then we would want some metrics in there that related to anti-racism, diversity, inclusion, equity, justice, fairness, all of those things, and have some mechanism that if they weren't meeting those, which are part of our fabric, that we'd have some recourse at that point.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. I think one of the things we can all glean from is when you said the School of Medicine not being comfortable for racism or for racist behavior, because again, we don't want to create a haven for any of that, racist behavior. And I agree with that all of our campuses should be uncomfortable for individuals, whether it be faculty, staff, or students who have thoughts that are not inclusive. Dr. Lane.
Just add to that. Totally agree with Dr. Cruz. What we're finding is there's sometimes a lack of training, in that, regardless of what people may believe, we do have core values that we're focused on. We have beliefs, things that we really want to make sure that environment has, so it is welcoming and it's safe. One of the things that we've done here is we've instituted an ombudsperson for faculty and an ombudsperson for staff. That was something that, again, on that tour, people said we needed to bring back. I guess we had it at one point in time. I can't remember if we had it or not, but it's here now. And a lot of these things that people may encounter, we want to make sure they have avenues or there's a vehicle for them to make us aware of what is happening. Some of the history has been that, well, when I say something about it, nothing happens. Well, we want to change that now. We want to make sure that people feel safe in sharing what is occurring, what they're having to deal with or go through. Our folks are even working on a bullying policy, things that, again, I think are pretty cutting edge in terms of what we expect our environment to be here. So I would just encourage, again, whoever is experiencing that to bring it to our attention, because now is the best time of any. We've been on this call now about an hour now, and that's all we're talking about. So I think that, as Jerry mentioned, you probably stick out like a sore thumb if you're doing that, and we are going to address it through the appropriate channels if it is occurring. So again, it's a new day in some cases. We want to make sure we stay that way.
So much, Chancellor Lane, and for specifically putting individuals in place, our ombudsman for faculty and staff, and like you said, providing that vehicle. So when someone says, what should we do? We're being very clear saying that you should report that. It's one thing to tell a colleague, it's another thing to go through a formal process. And as Chancellor Lane said, that our desire and we will be responsive. We will communicate and follow the process. As we talk about ADEI work, a big part of that is processes. We've heard Dr. Cruz and everyone else on the panel talk about structure. So all of our campuses have bias report incidents in place. We have reporting mechanisms where if you see racist behavior, if you see something, say something. It could be in your classroom, outside of your classroom. It could be committed against you personally. It could be something that you observe against another peer, faculty, staff, or student. And the report actually accounts for you to still report, even if it wasn't committed against you as well. So we would highly encourage individuals to use these reporting systems. And we have them in place because we do want to know, and we don't want to know for the sake of knowledge. We want to know so that we can act and create a more inclusive environment. Dr. Miner, you would like to respond to that as well.
Sorry, I it's an interesting question, but I don't want to imply anything in just the question, but it's always curious to me that sometimes we conflate this concept of tenure with the ability to do and say whatever. And that is not the original intent, the spirit, or the policy framework of tenure, which was initially established as a safeguard to academic freedom, this ability to pursue intellectual or scholarly interest and teach without interference from corporations, political influences, and other entities. It's not a safeguard to harm other people. And I think we have to be clear about those distinctions, number one. And number two, quite honestly, I think we as an institution must have the courage and dare I say the guts to confront and take on that kind of behavior in our university community when it's unwarranted and when it's harmful to other people.
Thank you. Courage to confront. I'll just leave it at that. Those were excellent words, and I do think that's the necessary action. And I also appreciate you just reinforcing the goal of tenure, and it is to protect for academic freedom, but not to protect for hate speech or for mistreatment or contempt or bias or racism or stereotypes or microaggressions. None of those are tolerated on SIU campuses. So thank you for making that clear. Dr. Mahoney, do you have any thoughts on that as well? Tenure track professors, races.
I think the rest of the panel handled it really well. I think I would pick up on something that Chancellor Minor said. I think sometimes we talk about, speech or thoughts or ideas that you have, then there's also the impact of those, which can be harm and direct harm to students, fellow employees, and things like that. And I think to not address issues where we have particularly cases of harm being done would be we would not be living up to our responsibilities to ignore that. And so I think those things are things that we have to address. And again, you can't, like I said, you can't do anything you want just because you're tenured. There are kind of expectations that go along with having tenure and maintaining that position. So, so I think there is ways to deal with it depending on what the situation is too. And again, I don't know exactly what the person asking the question was thinking about or what who they were thinking of, but I think there are things, again, focusing on that where we're doing harm to people. I think we need to do something about that.
Evidence of harm, as you said, that's definitely not something we want on our campuses. But that was, I did want to communicate that was the primary question that we had from our audience members today. And I don't want to belabor the conversation. I think it's been very robust, fruitful, and productive. I would encourage those of you who are observing the conversation today to definitely feel free to use this as a preview. We will have it recorded and part of our body of work on our YouTube channel, so you can feel free, again, to go back and also to refer others. But before we close, I would like to ask, are there any concluding comments from any of our panelists before we adjourn our March conversation of understanding this afternoon? Well, I just would like to really just give an applause for those of you who are joining through YouTube. Again, I think that this has been a great conversation. I've learned a great deal. And not only have I learned a great deal, I would just like to say there is even more just great appreciation and respect for each of you for the work that you do, for the ways that you lead us in strategic, intentional, and deliberative ways. And so I just really want to say I appreciate you, and we look forward to working together to augment anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts across the state. So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you for the participants as well. You all have a great afternoon.